Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. My name's Matt Thurgood. I'm the course leader for Criminology and Justice here at ACAP, and I'll be talking to you tonight about the relationship between crime and the media. Always a fun topic. Before we get into it, in the spirit of reconciliation, ACAP acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I'm coming to you, as I mentioned, from Melbourne, for NAM, and specifically the lands of the Bunurong peoples. So if you know the peoples whose lands you are on, feel free to pop that in the chat as well. All right. So we are going to hopefully have a bit of fun for the next hour. So essentially what we're going to do, this is a bit of a taster session. And what I'm going to give you is a bit of a mix of a sort of a lecture, some information, and what we call a tutorial, so an interactive session. The sorts of things that we do with our students in our criminology courses here at ACAP. So as I said, we are discussing the relationship between crime and the media. There'll be plenty of time for questions, I think, anyway. And as I said, we'll be chatting throughout. I've got a bunch of questions to throw to you as well. So yeah, hopefully we'll have some fun. So yeah, as I said, I'm the course leader for Criminology and Justice here at ACAP. I've been here for a smidge over 20 years now. Essentially, yeah, teaching. I'm at ACAP because it gives us as academics the chance to focus on teaching, which a lot of universities don't do. So that's really the main reason why I've been here all this time. Plus I love criminology. I classify myself and much of the team, actually, we classify ourselves as critical criminologists. That means that we look at things perhaps from a bit more of a, maybe some would call it a radical viewpoint, but really a questioning viewpoint, looking at society broadly. What are the underlying sort of factors? You know, who are the powers that be that what are the sorts of broader influences that result in criminal activity? So not necessarily focused on the individual causes of crime, but the broader social sort of factors. We might get into a bit of that today. I am also a student, so I am a couple of years away from completing a PhD, or at least I'm supposed to be a couple of years away. And yeah, a bit of fun. I like to watch sport. Bit of cricket at the moment, bit of American football at the moment as well. Otherwise, it's AFL, being a Melbourne boy. Big fan of horror movies. So I imagine you've probably checked out the ACAP website, you know a bit about us. ACAP's been around since 1983, so quite a bit of time. Obviously, criminology is part of what we offer, along with, as you can see there, coaching, counselling, psychology, social work, etc. And yeah, we are right across the country. As far as criminology is concerned, though, we are on campus in Melbourne, and obviously teach online across the country. So yeah. All right. I'll leave any sort of broader questions about courses and ACAP itself, perhaps for the end. I think it's best if we just jump straight into the content we're going to be discussing. So in talking about crime and the media, I think it's important that we consider what we actually mean by media. I mean, it's a term we all use. It's thrown around all the time. Often the media is talking about the media, but just thinking about what it actually is, essentially it's about a method of communication, really, when we think about it. So we can talk about, broadcasts. I mean, if we think traditionally, right, media used to just be what? Print and broadcast. So newspaper or radio as well, and television. Now, of course, we have the wonder that is the internet. So you've got websites, you've got blogs, you've got social media sites, etc., etc. So that's, basic background to it. The key question, or one of the key questions anyway, that criminologists ask, it's not really what media is, but rather who is the media. Okay. And what we're thinking about there is who owns these platforms? Who owns, right, these forms of media that we consume? Okay. Can anyone suggest why that's an important question? You can pop your answer in the chat, or if, again, we are recording, but if you feel comfortable, I don't mind people jumping on your microphone. Any suggestions? Why is it good to ask who owns media? Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, and Carla and Alan. Is someone jumping on?
That's me. Hi, I'm Sarah.
Hi, Sarah, go ahead.
I think the bias that applies to who owns the company,
Indeed.
or the what it is, whatever is portraying information.
Yeah, thank you. I think, yeah, you've got a bit of agreement in the chat there. Gillian?
My name's Gillian. They've got control over what people read.
Yeah. So depending on who owns a media channel, that you could say biases, that slants, that influences the information that they relay. Yeah. So it is an important question to ask because we need to know if there is an agenda behind the information that we're getting. So what everyone has said, thanks for everyone jumping in the chat. You guys are great. You've got the issue of, yeah, particular perspectives, the political aspect of it, possible ideological agendas pushing through. I mean, I imagine we've all seen over the last few years the issue with Murdoch-owned media, right? And most of it seems to be on focused on Fox News in the United States, but Sky News in Australia, the Herald Sun, you know, those sorts of publications, or its equivalent in other states. Sorry, it's Melbourne bias, but we know that they are pushing, you know, a right-wing agenda. They support the Liberal Party here in Australia, or they support the Republican Party over in the United States, and push, yeah, again, a particular bias or agenda. So that means the information, sorry, Sarah, that means the information that we're getting isn't neutral. Okay, it's not just information for the sake of information, it's information with a slant. Sarah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if they're wanting to push a bill, the media that's on whatever side will put forward what they want people to see to make them think a certain way, to push agendas that may not be pushed through.
Indeed, yeah. So this speaks to as well the influence that the media has. Okay, and we'll definitely come back to that because that's a major issue, particularly when we're talking about crime and criminal justice issues. And Jackie, that's a great point around just in terms of the agenda and the bias that media companies can have, whether they do withhold certain information and not report, yeah, again, neutrally or objectively, and push, yeah, other forms of information. So it really is an important question. And just as a final example of that, I think we've seen it as well with, what's his name, Elon Musk, buying out Twitter, and just the change with that platform, yeah, and what's been happening there. So it is something that I think is a very real issue. We don't often think, well, it sounds like everyone here is thinking about it, but I imagine there are a lot of people who don't think about it. And just assume that what they're getting is neutral and objective when that is not the case. That is not the case. All right. So part of the issue with all of this, and it speaks again to the influence of the media, is just how much we use the media, right? And how reliant we are, whether that's for information, for news, so-called news, whether that's around, I am curious about something, so I will, you know, I'll Google it, right? Through to entertainment. So I've got a statistic there from Davis, just from the late last year, actually, saying that in 2022, throughout the year, people spent, and this is in Australia, people spend an average of 147 minutes per day on social media, right? So that's just social media. Folks in the room, how do you compare to that. So what's 147 minutes? It's 2.5 hours, let's call it. Sarah, that's a great question. We might get into that in a moment too, but that's a much broader philosophical question, I think. But yeah, how much are you in line with the average? About 2.5 hours of social media use per day. People above, people below, or does that sound about right? I can honestly say mine is far lower because no Facebook here, no Twitter. I used up all my social media on MySpace back in the day, showing my age. Yeah, it looks like that's probably about it or more. Looks like. Yeah, I think, Nicole, that's a fair point. The fact that well, we access it via our phones, right? Everything is really our phones. It's not like, well, back in the day on MySpace when I would have to open up my laptop or start up a computer to access it. Really, there weren't really apps. 20 years ago, almost, probably 15 years ago. Now it's, well, we go down rabbit holes, whether it's doom scrolling on TikTok, Tegan, or you go down rabbit holes on YouTube or whatever it might be. So using your phone for other things like research. What about other forms of media? Does anybody actually watch television news? Because there are broadcasts a lot. I'll say listening to the radio. I like that, Jackie. So Alan watches TV and radio. Emma. Sarah just doesn't watch TV. Fair enough. Darrell. Yeah, that's an interesting one, Carla. After the main COVID stuff, Tegan doesn't have a TV. That's interesting. So everything's devices, I'm guessing, Tegan? Yeah. I mean, to be honest, if I'm in front of the television and it's news time and I'm, ABC or SBS, to be honest, I don't watch the other ones. But it's interesting, I think, because just looking at, the TV guide on your digital TV, the amount of broadcasts, there's like 3 or 4 from around 4 p.m. So it's, I don't know. Things there seem to have changed, but it feels like people, I don't know, do watch, I don't know. Anyway, it's an interesting one, I think. Anyways, clearly we are all consuming media in one way or another, whether that's news media, whether that's getting information through social media or similar. Or family, Narelle, perhaps. There's, I mean, it's largely inescapable, I think, whether that's social media or other forms. So just as a general sort of question, if we think about the types of media that you've used, let's think just about news media. All right, just for the sake of setting some parameters. What news media have we consumed today? And there's no judgment, no shame. I have we can count Twitter, Tegan, if it gives you news. The Today Show, Sarah hasn't watched any news. 7 News. Only radio, Jackie, I'm with you. ABC News Online. So ABC and The Guardian are the 2 news apps I have. And my go-to. So look for the objectivity with the ABC and a bit of a left-wing bent, if I'm being honest, via The Guardian. Radio Sister is working fine for Narelle. So just as a, Tegan, I'd argue that does count because that's a direct news source, The Australian right there. Does anybody actually, do you listen for something or watch for something in particular, or just the news is on, so I should watch and listen, or that type of thing, or it's on in the background? Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Nicole. So yeah, when you hear of something you want to see, or get more information about it. So a major event or incident. Yeah, I mean, podcasts go another level, don't they, Tegan? So generally, yeah, you're looking at something much more specifically, right? Alan's watching intently, watching it all. Yeah, Kel, I think happy news. You just have to wait for what they call the California story, right? At the end of every news bulletin, you'll get, Jack's the lucky staffy. Is that the dog, Sarah, who was not adopted for a couple of years or something, and then that popped up on my feed too. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah, it's a good question, Aaron. Are there any news outlets, print or digital, who are unbiased? I run the argument with my father-in-law and my father that the ABC is as close to an unbiased news source as we can get. And they both tell me that it's not, because it's lefty, but I mean, it's government owned, right? So, yeah, I would argue that's an SBS. Probably SBS is even more objective. Certainly more global. I do like on the one hand, SBS News I find very informative, but arguably more depressing, because they tend not to go with any sort of it's all just, it's all the wars and stuff that you don't hear about in mainstream media. But anyway, so yeah, I'd argue that's probably as close as it gets. So that's quite a few specific things around specific events and issues. Yeah, I mean, there'll always be stuff around crime for sure. Just depends what specific issue around crime, right, that the media is fascinated with at any given point. Speaking of which, we should use that as a segue. So when we're thinking about crime and the media, there is a fairly significant relationship, okay? And arguably it's more about the media utilizing crime as a focus, as something that it is going to report on, okay? Whether that's, again, posting something on a social media platform, or, clickbait on its website, or whatever it is, right? And that's for a number of reasons. Firstly, most of society, arguably, is pretty interested in crime. We're pretty interested in criminal justice stuff. I'm sure there are lots of suggestions as to why that's the case. But yeah, it's something that fascinates people, the whys, the wherefores, the responses, the lack of response, the lack of resources in certain areas, as Narelle suggested, these types of things. We do have a fascination with it. So media platforms, whatever we want to call them, media channels, know they're going to get an audience, right, if they're reporting about crime. So there's I'm pretty sure she's Australian author, Yvonne Jukes, who's written about crime in the media for decades. And she talks about how crime is newsworthy. Okay, it has these key factors or key elements that means it's always going to, generally at the start of your news bulletin, okay, or first couple of pages of your newspaper, or, top of the doom scroll, whatever it is, crime is going to be sitting there. So it's often dramatic. It's got elements of risk and danger. Often how it's reported is very individual, right? So we talk about an individual offender and an individual victim. Okay, who is this bad person? Who is this poor person, right, who's been victimized? So you get that sort of, I suppose, the human interest aspect is thinking about these individuals and their stories and all the rest of it. That links to partly the simplification of crime as reported by news. And that is how often the bigger issues, right, the real underlying issues that result in criminal activity, are ignored it comes back to, this is a bad person, right? Or some sort of flippant remark or flippant seeming cause, right? Rather than really anything deep and meaningful. And often crime comes with visual imagery, right? So it's the chalk outline, right? It's the blood splatter. It's the wrecked car. It's the person being taken away in handcuffs, right? All those sorts of images that we see. Yeah, the police tape, exactly. All that sort of thing. Yeah, Sarah, I think part of it is around fear, the societal interest. So media often operates on a fear-based model, I think, particularly mainstream and reporting around crime. And I'll get into that a little bit. Fear, there is a lot of fear around crime, and I argue that much of it is unnecessary. We're probably safer than we think we are, to some extent. Crime is often over-reported, and that drives fear, right? And that obviously drives eyeballs and this type of thing. Yeah. And Jackie, yes, we'll definitely come back to that stuff, how we get the misrepresentation of crime for sure. We'll come back to that. And yeah, that's a great example, Nicole, around COVID updates. Yeah, how, here in Victoria, we had, I think most states actually, yeah, you had the Premier standing up every day giving a news conference, right? And that became, well, we were in lockdowns and whatnot. So everyone's watching it, everyone's trying to understand it. And that does raise fear, potentially. So that's all part of it. That's an interesting point too, Kathy, around humans being voyeuristic. That might be part of it too. We don't mind seeing things happen to other people, right? And it's not necessarily because we're mean or, yeah, seeing what's going on with other people is, perhaps a key part of it too. Yeah. So the impacts of this is that media will always report criminal issues, right? Significant crimes, okay, and I think it's important to note that it's not all crimes that get reported, okay? There will be moments when I say moments, perhaps over the course of a month, there will be a particular crime reported about, right, or a particular issue reported about. So we've been hearing a lot about, things like domestic violence, intimate partner violence for quite some time now, right? So that's been a long-running kind of theme, arguably an important one. Not arguably, that's an important one. But when you hear about things perhaps like, I don't know, cars getting broken into, or I saw coverage of, was it in Alice Springs perhaps, or Darwin, where there were issues with youth offenders stealing cars and then getting into police chases and stuff like that, right? There will be something that media fixates on, and they give us the impression that there's a lot more of that crime happening than there actually is. Okay, so you might be surprised to know that across Australia, crime rates have largely dropped over the past 5 to 10 years, right? Broadly. So we're actually safer now than we are. For offences that have increased, that's less about there being more crime and more about increased reporting. So sex offences, for example, have increased over that period of time. Sexual assault, rape, those sorts of offences. But that is more about police doing better in how they handle these cases, victims, in particular women, feeling more comfortable reporting, right, their victimisation to police, right? So the Me Too movement had at least a bit to do with that, possibly a lot to do with that. So, it's those sorts of things. So what happens is all of our understanding, really, given we're getting it all through the media, all of our understanding tends to come just from media, and that skews people's perspectives and drives fear, right? Once again. So I did have a quick question here, and sorry, I love the stuff that's coming through on the chat, but I can't give everything attention. So please don't feel like your point is irrelevant or anything if I don't pick it up. It's just what's in my mind at the point as it comes through. And we'll certainly come back to the Netflix issue soon enough. So yeah, are there any other ways that people hear about crime or criminal issues apart from media? Any other sources of information?
Witnessing it in person.
Yeah, so that would be one way. Yeah, hearing people perhaps posts on social media, maybe that type of thing.
Being a nurse in a hospital. I'm a nurse.
Yeah. Thanks, Gillian. So yeah, just through your experiences, whether professional or otherwise, hearing from other people. Yeah. So that it's kind of haphazard is what I'd argue, right? So unless you're really looking for it or you just happen to hear about it, then at least on a daily basis. So I think, again, things like documentaries and Netflix, that's us looking for stuff, right? Perhaps on a specific case or a specific offender or something like that. But in terms of the everyday stuff, yeah, unless you're in a profession that's exposed to it, someone who works in the criminal justice system, in the health system, etc., we're probably not hearing that much about it, right? Is what I would argue. So again, the media has that opportunity to skew what we hear, how we hear it, what we're fearful of, and all of that. All right. So what this results in is essentially a set of crime myths. And I won't go through all of these, but there is a whole number of them, and I've just got a couple up on the slide anyway. But what these myths about crime really revolve around is how society's perception of crime is quite different to the reality, right, in a lot of ways. So part of it is criminal behavior can potentially be seen as rare and therefore shocking. At the same time, it can be over-exaggerated, right? So there's a bit of a contradiction there. Yeah. In particular, though, I'd argue violent criminal behavior, significant, where there is significant harm to a victim, that type of crime is what tends to get reported, right? Because it's got the drama, it's got the risk, it's got those factors that Jukes talks about. When in reality, the crimes that are most likely to occur, can anyone tell me? What are the crimes? I mean, right now, you look out your window, what do you reckon's going on in the world? What sorts of criminal activities do you think people are engaging in? Yeah, so Alan, thanks. It's theft.
Drugs.
Yeah, drug use. So yeah, drug dealing as a result. Erin, I'd argue not home robberies. I'd argue that's one that the media's pushed. Probably domestic violence, to be honest, Tegan. Hence the importance of that actually being a focus. Yeah, possibly money laundering, Nicole. That's one we'll probably not be aware of.
Home invasion?
Not so much.
No.
That's again one that the media, I think, jumps on because that's one that drives fear, right?
Yeah.
So the rates of that aren't, they're not up there. Assault, probably not physical or assault out in the public, but probably behind closed doors. So more around domestic stuff. Yeah, the white collar stuff, right? Frauds and scams and all that sort of stuff is what's going on. Yeah, vandalism, this type of thing. Yeah. So not stuff that gets reported on all that much is really the case. Okay. It's minor property crime. Okay. It's maybe some property damage, some vandalism, maybe some spray painting. It's definitely illicit drug use, right? Not to shock you, but somewhere in your city or town or probably in your street, somebody is using illicit drugs, or I don't know, probably a 16-year-old is drinking alcohol, right? Illegal. So, driving offences, someone is speeding. Someone just went through a red light. Someone went through a stop sign, etc. Someone's on their phone while they're driving, right? This is the common stuff. It doesn't get reported on because it's common, right? It's arguably banal. It's everyday. There's not much of a story to it, right? In all likelihood, a lot of us have probably engaged in that stuff ourselves, right? broken driving laws. Yeah. We know that at least, I think it's pushing up to about 13% now of the general population is currently using cannabis, and 20 to 30% have used it at some point in their lifetime, right? So that's all the sort of common stuff. But when it comes to, sorry, go on.
I was going to say one very common one that everyone's done is jaywalking.
Yeah, exactly, right? Walking against the lights. But that's not going to be a major story on a current affair, for example, is it? So yeah, it's that idea of what's really happening, what's the reality around crime versus what we're being presented with the media, right? And that also extends to the offenders and the victims. Okay. The idea that in some cases, there's an interesting thing, I think, in Australia, and I don't know if this exists in other societies or even Western societies as well, but with certain offences, okay, we'll have an offender who is sort of portrayed as being this evil, awful person. Okay. The murderer, the rapist, the major scammer, right? These sorts of heartless people, right? Take advantage of others, do awful things to other people. Versus the bloke who kills his wife, who is sometimes reported as, well, actually, he was a good bloke. He was a good father. He was this, he was that. So again, we've got this weird contradiction around how some offenders, right, are reported, how they're portrayed. And that's, again, where, you know, as a critical criminologist, I think about, well, why is it? Why is domestic violence portrayed in a different way to other forms of violence? Okay, and that comes back to, you know, gender and the way that gender roles can be reinforced by media, right? The idea that, well, you know, what did she do to provoke him into engaging in violence, right? That sort of, again, myth around family violence, domestic violence, etc. All of that. Yeah, and then when it comes to things like sexual assault, for sure. Yeah, Tegan, you have all of those myths as well, the rape myths that unfortunately still prevail in society and even in the criminal justice system too. Yeah, but yeah, victim blaming, exactly, Jackie. Yeah. Yeah, and Mount, that's an interesting idea. The contradiction around the fear. Perhaps to some extent, I don't know, maybe the media doesn't want to push fear as much. I don't know, maybe it feels like there is meant to be a responsibility, right, that the media holds of informing consumers. But in order to hold you, there is that fear element. I'm not sure. That's a really interesting point. Yeah. So the other part around it is in general around crime and how offenders can be stigmatized in some way, right? That it's only bad people that commit crimes. And again, I'd argue we've all broken the law at some point. Okay. Again, whether it's minor, probably minor, right? Speeding, illicit drugs, jaywalking, whatever it might be. Yeah. So there's that separation that occurs. And again, that messes with the reality of it all. Right. So from an academic viewpoint, the effect of the media on consumers has actually been examined. So yeah, Boston and Coventry, you can see here on the slide, and they're English-based researchers came up with this idea of the CSI effect. Okay. And this is actually not so much to do with news media as it is to do with people watching fictional crime shows. All right. And this is where the Netflix bit comes in. Okay. So as much as there's, you know, the documentary series and all of that sort of stuff, indeed, Aaron, it's the CSI. What are they up to? CSI in someone's backyard, whatever. There's that many franchises of it, all of the various Law and Order franchises, all of that sort of stuff. Okay. Not to mention all of the English series, murder series, I don't think we have too much of it in Australia now, but it's certainly a lot that we import from America, from England, yeah, specifically on certain channels. So, yeah, there's a crime, the crime channel, Erin. That's what I was just thinking about on pay TV. Entire channels devoted to this stuff. So, what Mostyn and Coventry are talking about. So, as I said, they're talking less about news media and more about these fictional programs. Okay. And the fact that what people see portrayed in these fictional shows, they watch it enough and it begins to taint their view of the reality, right? Of the actual criminal justice system and how it works, and of crime itself. So just to run through those points that the main points out of Mostyn and Coventry's research. Violent crime is overrepresented, right? So when I'm talking about this, in the back of my brain is the Law and Order intro, right? The dum, and then it focuses in on a body on the street or a body in a dumpster or something like that, right? Homicide, it's sexual assault, it's rape, it's all of the big stuff, okay? It's nearly always violent crime. In fact, I'm not aware of any of those shows doing anything other than violent crime. And arguably, when we think about as well, all of the Netflix documentaries that have come out over the last few years, predominantly serial killers seems to be the go, or odd cases, cases perhaps where the justice system appears to have got things wrong, right? Things like that. All of that, again, skews people's view of the reality. They watch one documentary where where injustice has occurred, right? Where an innocent person has gone to jail, that type of thing. And they go, well, that happened once, so it must happen all the time. It's like, well, actually not. The criminal justice system gets it right more often than not. Other issues with all of this that the CSI effect results in, the causes of crime are often simplified and largely racialized. Okay, so it comes down to really basic stuff. The offender was greedy, or it was a crime of passion, or it's a if we're thinking American TV shows, right, it's an African American or Hispanic offender and a white victim, right? That type of thing. There was a study actually well before Mostyn and Coventry, and I can't remember the authors. It was mid to late 1990s. And it was an American study that looked at the show Cops. Do people know the show Cops? It's like one of the original so-called reality TV shows where it was set in Los Angeles, where there was a film crew, that followed around police officers. And what this study of that show found was that, it was that, wasn't it, Tegan? They had the Bad Boy soundtrack. And sorry if things get noisy in the background. We've got a thunderstorm rolling through my part of the world, so that's a bit of fun. But what this study found was that people who watch Cops regularly just assumed when they were told that a case happened, right? So as part of the study, here's the case, this is what happened, can you describe back to me? And when they didn't mention who the offender was or anything, the person, as part of the experiment, just assumed that the offender was African American because that's what they were used to seeing, right? So that racialization issue does happen, and sorry, I can't remember who mentioned it earlier, the issue around, I think it might have been you, Jackie, around African gangs. You might recall a few years ago, there was a huge media created kerfuffle around so-called African gangs and how they were going to ruin Melbourne and all this sort of thing. And Peter Dutton, who was the Home Affairs Minister at the time, said people in Melbourne are scared to go out for dinner and all of this. And it was just this huge blow up. Totally, not
it's interesting
in line with the reality. Sorry, who's that one? Is Sarah again? Sarah. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was interesting. When I was studying community services at TAFE, we went to the Children's Magistrate Courts in the city of Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the courts that I went to, this is the other side. Every single person on the stand, one after another, were African youth, boys.
Yep. So then the question that a critical criminologist would argue,
about being charged.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the question would be around why, what are police doing? Yeah. In that
and what
regard,
are we doing? We're not providing mentors, nothing.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, again, getting to what's going on, right? Underlying all this stuff. So why are these young men finding themselves in trouble with the law?
And I've had an experience, like a criminal experience, sexual experience, and they wanted me to report it to the police. I said, no, get him a mentor. And they said that we can't do that. We can charge him, but we can't give him a mentor.
Yeah. So, I mean, this gets really complex really quickly, right? There's only so much the police can do. So they can't extend social services. They can call social services, various social services, and try and put them in touch with people.
Hot or cold? Depends.
Pardon?
Hot or cold?
Well, yeah. And then it's around, well, do those social services have sufficient resources to help out?
Yeah.
You know, are they available in that particular area? There's so much, right, that's essentially broken, you could say, and that has a direct bearing on criminal activity, right? So you think about the mental health system and its failings and how it can do better to, you know, to help people and support people and all of that. That would help.
So the interesting thing was, most of them, none of their parents came, but the ones that did, it was only the mother.
Yeah. So again, it gets complex, and there's more to that, which we.
Sorry.
No. Thanks for raising it. But yeah, ultimately, I think the question, as Jackie has posted there, who gets charged and who doesn't, and why. Right. And are they able to represent themselves, and you know, what's the legal support and all of that, and it keeps going. So, there's a lot to unpack with all of that. And there's a lot, Aaron, around just assuming that things are working in a certain way when they're not. Again, so I won't start ranting about all of that, but yeah, there's again bigger issues around all of this. Circling back to the CSI effect, so again, issues with people watching too much of crime TV, essentially, is the criminal justice process itself gets misrepresented. And one of my favorite things that this piece of research talks about, and which I think if anyone's ever watched CSI, you might have observed this yourself, but where essentially the main characters, who are the main investigators, do everything, right? They investigate the crime scene, they gather evidence, they do an autopsy, they question the suspects, they question the witnesses, they do everything. They're like these superhumans, right? When in actual fact, that's at least 6 or 7 different people in different roles with different expertise and different qualifications, as well as the issues around just how court processes work and juries and all this type of thing. The CSI study doesn't do it so much, but again, that one that I was referring to with cops from the mid-90s, that study found that people often thought that police were much more effective in their jobs, and that the criminal justice system was much quicker than it actually is. Yeah, that things were resolved, and that happens with Law and Order CSI as well, right? Because you think about it, in 1 hour, in one episode, you have the crime being committed and you have the crime being resolved, right? Someone is found guilty, etc., etc. Yeah, not at all, Aaron. I mean, there's bureaucracy, there's due process, there's all these things that have to happen, right? So this is why we hear about someone was charged with something that happened years ago. Yeah, and it's not going to go to court for another 6 to 12 months, right? This is the nature of the criminal justice system, right? It's slow. Part of that is intentional to make sure that things are gotten right. Part of it is just bureaucracy and red tape. So yeah, and I know we're focusing more on America than anywhere else, but the CSI effect is interesting for the fact that what Mostyn and Coventry found was that it's across Western countries, right? So England has a huge fascination with crime and crime TV, right? Which there's a free-to-air channel, one of the Nines, I think, and part of the Nine network has. It feels like every hour of the day they're running some English crime show, right? So England has a similar fascination right, with crime, and it's all the violent stuff and it's all the awful stuff and it all happens. Yeah, again, Australia, I can't think of too many crime focused shows that we have on TV. It's been a while since Blue Heelers, but you know, we also do produce that stuff too. Yeah, the stuff around jail, Sarah, that's an interesting one, actually. Yeah. I think what are you probably thinking? What's that? Orange is the New Black? Everyone told me I should have watched that. I never did. But those sorts of programs, that.
Sorry, I'm going to talk now. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just thought it'd be easier. I'm quicker talking than typing. It's like Orange is the New Black and all that sort of stuff. In the line of work that I do with some young people, and a lot of them were like, "Oh, jail's not that bad," you know, blah blah blah. I'm like, it's not like what you see on TV. It's nothing like that. It's a lot worse.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not meant to be a good place, but at the same time, yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Around how we're trying to keep people out of those places, and yet you have programs that they do romanticize it, as you've suggested there. Yeah, versus I suppose in the old days, in Australia, Prisoner, and that came back. Didn't they do a remake of that, a reboot?
Yeah.
That was kind of an ugly side of prisons, but yeah. I suppose it all goes to show. Sorry, I'm talking over somebody.
Yeah, sorry. No, that's okay. I too am quicker in speaking than typing. It's
No worries.
the youth justice, when it goes back to youth justice system and the juveniles. So they go to juvie, and kids pretty much go to a school camp. A lot of they get off a lot easier. So they just think that's just a catch up with their mates to go back to juvie, but they don't realise the long term effects when they go get a job. With that conviction recorded on their name, it's a lot harder for them to get a job. It's a lot harder for them to see a brighter future. So they just keep going back to jail. It's what they know.
Yeah. Thanks, Narelle. Again, I mean,
it curb that behaviour.
Yeah, well, it is. Again, it's really complicated, isn't it? Around how you do have these young people, who end up in youth detention or youth prisons. And the youth facilities, I think, is the official way we talk about them. And I mean, they're not meant to be harsh environments, right? These are young people. I mean, you have kids as young as 13, 14 sometimes in some states going to these places. It's not good for them, right? They're not going to come out healthy.
I've seen a lot of them. Yeah, definitely not good.
And as you say, with the convictions and all that sort of stuff that follows, they're not they're not going. Sorry, just trying to get a light turned on in the background here because it's very dark. Might be able to see me a bit better. And yeah, it is about that socialization into crime, that idea of, the youth facilities being almost, that's the sort of primary school or the high school, and then you go into the adult prison, which is the university of crime, right? All of that. So yeah, we're going in a number of different directions in this discussion, but that's okay. It's the complex nature, right, of crime and criminal justice. Bringing it back to media, I think it's interesting, the experiences that some of you have in your day-to-day jobs and what you've seen and what you've experienced, and how often far removed what we see on, say, television, even on the news, is from the reality. Okay, and unfortunately, as you all established early on, the media comes with a bias, right? And even fictional shows tend to reinforce this idea of crime is bad, crime is done by bad people, and so we need harsh responses to it. And this is often what media push. There's a reason why our political parties often push really similar ideas, and it's because they're scared of looking soft on crime, appearing soft on crime, which is just political BS, right? And what it ends up in, because people are scared of crime, because we watch so much crime, or we see so much media about crime, it leads to what are called populist punitive policies. So populist meaning it's stuff that's assumed it's going to please the public. Punitive, it's harsh, it's locking people away, right? So we build more prisons rather than, you know, developing a mentoring program or developing social services or helping people, even if they've been in prison, right? Helping them when they come out, find employment, find stable
Transition
residence.
back into
Yeah,
living. Yeah.
exactly. That's the word, transition, from prison life to society. Yeah, the reintegration back into society. So instead, yeah, our tax dollars go to, well, you know, we'll employ another 500 police. We'll build another prison. We'll lock people up for longer, right? All it does, create more crime.
But some criminals also don't, like my aunt's a prison officer, and yeah, she said that some people have just spent so long in jail, they can't function in the real world.
Yeah.
And they just go commit more crimes to go back to what is more comfortable to them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's institutionalization.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that idea that people, and that's why, I mean, there's a really strong push at the moment for us to getting on the, getting back to the youth crime issue of raising the age. You might have seen that, and it's a hashtag, raise the age, from 10 to at least 12. Because if you've got people involved in the criminal justice system as young as, say, even let's say 13, 14, there is a good chance that's it, right? That is now their life trajectory, right? And
it's also what they've grown up with as well. Like if they come from a family of crime, that's all they're going to know. So that's what they'll think is the norm.
And that's that cycle, right? And then it just keeps going. So again, we need things that break that cycle. Yeah. And there was a comment earlier around Indigenous offenders, right? And Indigenous youth, and that's what we see. Yeah. So what do we got? 30 times overrepresentation of Indigenous people throughout the Australian criminal justice, right? Across all states. And that's because of these massive underlying factors that go back to colonization and all the rest of it, arguably forms of inherent racism in our system. Yeah, through to things like, Jackie, that's a great point. Again, the standardized sentencing. So reducing judicial discretion so the judges basically have less parameters. This is the minimum, and regardless, that's what they have to go with. Yeah, even though
same sentence for the same crime for whoever commits it, kind of thing.
Yeah, which you can argue, yes. This, I mean,
but
if
then
you study
again,
criminology, this has been an ongoing debate for bloody 400 years, really. If you have, same crime gets the same penalty, well, that's consistency, that's fairness. But others argue, well, actually, no, not all offenders are the same. You have to judge based on the individual offender.
How many times they've committed a crime, or
underlying reasons, right? Is it fair? I mean, if you run with that, like really strictly, let's say, that's a massive crack of thunder above my head, sorry. If you run with the idea of just simple, consistent sentencing, that runs into what they call mandatory sentencing.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's important to have
to go with your comment. Sorry,
this is a few. Sarah.
Yeah, me.
Yeah, just to go with what you're saying, Matt. This made me think of something I haven't thought for many, many years. When I was first nursing, I was looking after a young guy, and he committed a crime. He fell asleep at the wheel, and he was sentenced to max in prison. And it was his only crime that he'd ever been convicted for. He'd probably done little ones, you know, like as all young guys do.
Yep.
He was all of 18, and he was sentenced to max time. While he was in prison, he was then used by other prisoners as I can't think of the word. They used him, they bashed the absolute living daylights out of him, and he has now spent his whole life as a disabled person.
I was just going to say.
And the media made him so bad, like he was the world's worst, but he was a really nice guy.
Well,
Sorry,
that's,
that just made...
No, that's, I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? You can't just assume that all these people are horrible people. People make mistakes, and sometimes they have awful consequences, and there does need to be a significant penalty. But I think we need to be sometimes a bit more humane in how we operate. The other Sarah, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say the big one now is mental health. Like was this person, you know, in their right mind when they did this, or whatever it is that like they're going through.
Mm.
And that's so like I think like there's a growth in like like mental health institutions at the moment.
Well, there should be.
Yeah,
right?
there
That's
is,
where
but
we need
not
to
as
plough
much
the
as what they
support.
should be.
Yeah, rather than building new prisons, we should be building more social support and mental health support services. That's where the money should be going, right? And that's not to say, again, complicated, it's not to say that there is a direct causation between mental health and criminal activity. There isn't, but they're often co-occurring. And we also know the criminal justice system causes mental health issues. So people who go to prison come out with stuff that they didn't have before. So there's all of that. So yeah, Farzana, your point around, you know, Norway and those Northern European countries do it really well, right? Heavy rehabilitative focus, reintegration works really well. The punishment is going to prison, right? And that's, again, if we're talking 400 years of criminology, the idea of prison is deprivation of liberty. You don't send someone to prison for punishment. It is the punishment. You're pulling them out of society, away from their family and friends, away from their network, and they're stuck in this room, right? And in this place with people they don't know for however long. That's the penalty, right? So, yes, anyways, all of that. And yeah, general change, I think, Narelle, I don't think there's any harm in that. All right, so we're actually pushing time. We are well away from the topic that was media and the crime. I'll leave that question at the end there for those of you who keep watching Netflix stuff and all that sort of stuff, but something to think about next time you're looking at the next Ted Bundy series or whatnot. But yeah, so again, I feel like we've gone quite a way away from the media, so the conclusion probably doesn't hold so well. Yeah, if you need to take off, go ahead. For those of you that can stick around, just real quick, is anybody enrolled already to start studying with us? Not yet. Hopefully you, well, I can see some people. Yeah, there's a few people who are. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
For those that are thinking of it, yeah, so you'll be covering this sort of stuff, the media and crime stuff. There's actually a unit called Crime in the Media that you'll be studying probably later in the year. But yeah, those are the 3 courses that we offer at ACAP, the associate degree, the Bachelor of Criminology and Justice, and there's also the Bachelor of Psychological Science and Crim that covers both of those. So if you're thinking of, you want to be a psychologist working with offenders, the last one is the way to go. If you're thinking more broad criminology, either of those 2 are fine. So there's my email. You're more than welcome to get in touch with me, whether you are going to be a new student at ACAP or otherwise. If you've just got some general queries or want some links to stuff, feel free. If anyone's got any questions now, I'm happy to take them. So Farzana, access to textbook online. Do you know which unit you would be talking about? We will distribute the book lists pretty soon, I think. So if you can maybe give it a week. If you haven't heard from us, from the college, use that connect@acap.edu.au email and they'll be able to help you out with your textbooks and things. Forensic criminology, Erin, is a really specific area. So to do that, really, you're doing a forensics course first, forensic science. So you're doing the physiology, the anatomy, that kind of deal, and then you get the criminology as well. So it's more a science course with criminology. Yeah, it's not something really we cover so much. Nicole, if you are, with your browsing, have questions, feel free to get in touch. And everyone, I think we should probably call it there because it is 8:30. Those of you who have signed up, thanks. I will see you at orientation, which is at the end of January off the top of my head. I think the 30th of January. So look forward to seeing you then. And again, feel free to get in touch if you have any queries. So thanks again for coming. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you,
hopefully
Matt.
I'll see you down the road.
Just one question, Matt.
Thanks,
Just one question, Matt.
Julian. Go ahead, Sarah.
Regarding the student portal, like learning where to find recordings and stuff like that, will that be in the orientation?
Yeah, we can cover all of that.
Okay, thank you. I just
No
want to make
worries.
sure.
Yeah, don't worry. We'll get you well sorted
Yeah, cool. Thank
I
you.
run
It's
the
not
orientation, so I'll see you there and make sure, yeah, you're
Thank you.
all sorted. No worries.
Thank you, Matt. Very interesting.
Glad to hear it. Thanks. And thanks everyone for your participation too.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Yeah, makes it much more fun when you're all involved. So that was great. All right. Well, I'll stop the recording now. Again, if you need to get in touch, please do. If you just got even a really small thing or what you think is a small thing, do get in touch. As you can see there, our first trimester for the year starts on the 6th of Feb. So a few weeks away. And yeah, I might see you. Thanks again. Take care.